Hey gamers, my name is Micheal Baron. I'm a game designer at Cerebral Fix. I've been there for the past 5 years. This year we developed a reproductive health game with our partner Sexual Wellbeing Aotearoa. Brief table of contents. So I'll go into the background of this project, what went into the thinking, then about how we started to work together, game developers and sexual health educators. Then I'll go into what we made and how they took ownership of that project. And then wrap it up nicely with a little conclusion, pun intended. A brief content warning. This is a sensitive subject. It can be very stigmatized. So this talk is going to mention topics such as sex, pregnancy, contraception, menstruation, sexually transmitted infections, and gaming. Now, these are pretty sensitive subjects, so we want to talk about them with care, but we also want to normalize these things. So we're talking very candidly and perhaps a little bit cheekily. So with all that out of the way, let's talk about sex, your well-being, and women's reproductive health. Some background. As I said, this was a collaborative development between Cerebral Fix, a game development studio in Otautahi, Christchurch, and Sexual Wellbeing Aotearoa, the largest provider of sexual health information and services in New Zealand. Our goal was to develop a game that provides clinically accurate reproductive health knowledge in a way that is fun and digestible. This game had certain responsibilities. It'd be educational and fun, yes, but the education had to be clinically accurate. It had to be vetted and signed off by doctors before it could go into the game. The game would be used to address misconceptions, and it would do so in a way that would be digestible and approachable for people new to this subject. As we mentioned, there's a lot of stigma. A lot of sexual health education can be scary. It can be shameful. And we don't want to do that. We want to be supportive, we want to be positive, we want to be considerate. Now, this is a game, not a diagnostic tool. If you want to get more detailed information, they do have a website, they have experts on hand that you can get in contact with. This is a way to introduce this topic to people who are new to it. In effect, we're making the tutorial for reproductive health, which is kind of some of the intersectionality between education and design. When you come to think of it, we game designers are also educators, and that we teach people how to play games. And getting there is through tutorials. That's how we get people into the core flow. I pressed the wrong button, sorry. So, how do games teach? There's lots of different ways to do tutorials. I want to focus on tutorial zones. So think about your Great Plateau from Zelda, the safe shallows in Subnautica. These are places where you can learn the core concepts of the game. You can be introduced to them in an area that has lower challenge, lower complexity. You still have freedom to explore, but it's within a constrained, designed environment. It's a distillation of the intended full game experience. And I picked these examples because all the best tutorials feel intuitive and embedded. You're just playing the game and it's structured in a way to help you learn it. So when I say getting into the flow, I mean Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi's psychological theory of flow, the state of concentration and engagement that can be achieved when you complete a task that meets the level of your skill. If something is too challenging for your skill, it can be really stressful. If it's too easy for your skill, it can be very boring. But there's this Goldilocks zone. This is where you feel focused, in the zone, locked in. And as you can see, it grows as your skill grows. This is how we already think about this concept in game development with the perfect pause, with the difficulty curve. So when you're making a tutorial, you're thinking about the players who are here. They have the lowest amount of skill, so they should get the lowest amount of challenge. This can also apply to learning, just learning any concept. If we replace skill with comprehension of the subject and challenge with complexity of what you're trying to teach, the same theory applies. The more you understand about it, the more you are able to engage with the complex concepts. How do you win in a game about pregnancy? This was a question that was asked of us by SWA. It's a bit of a challenge. What's winning in a game about pregnancy? Is getting pregnant winning, or is not getting pregnant winning? That depends on your perspective. Now, the question itself is a little bit of a misconception, but we'll get into that later. What it does point out is that there are two outcomes with two very different audiences. These are mutually exclusive, polar opposites results. They have very different goals, but they're both valid goals to have. SWA already provides services for both of these audiences. So our game would also need to provide for both of these audiences, for the people who want to be pregnant and the people who do not, and for people who are uncertain either way. What are our games? So this question perhaps explains the first one. Our client partner was very unfamiliar with games. They really only knew them through reputation. They didn't play them, but they did have experience with websites and social media. So it wasn't a lack of tech knowledge, it was just a gap in knowledge about games specifically. So before we could develop a game together, I wanted to give them an on-ramp into games. So this is about building our shared vocabulary. Welcome to the world of games. So I wanted to give SWA a baseline of game knowledge, show them some of the breadth and depth that is available to this medium, show them the unique experiences that you can get from playing games, and in doing so, provide them with enough language and some structure so that they can communicate with us, so that they can make informed decisions about the game they're commissioning. And at the same time, you can do some cheeky precedent research too and see what they really like. I keep pressing that one, it just feels nicer. So, here are some of the games that were introduced. We introduced maybe 20 or so games, but I'm choosing these ones for a point. So, misconceptions. Let's think about that question, how do you win? Well, games don't need to have a win-lose paradigm. Simply playing a game can be the reward in and of itself. So games like Unpacking or A Little to the Left. You don't play them to win, you play them to have a good time. In addition, A Little to the Left and Unpacking both are not character focused. A lot of our early discussions got really focused on, okay, who are the characters going to be? What diversity needs do we need to represent? How are we going to be appropriate? We don't necessarily need to have characters to be compelling, however. Games are a participatory medium. Papers, Please is a great example of this. You're an active participant. Your morality has a major effect on the game. It is about you outside of the game and how you want to interface with the game. Florence is another example of participatory games, but about ludonarrative resonance, about game mechanics that really help to communicate the idea of what you're doing. For example, the conversation puzzle. When the characters are having an early conversation where they don't know each other, puzzle pieces are very small, they're very careful about what they say. When they're comfortable, they're big pieces. And when they're having an argument, it adds a timer, it makes the pieces all jagged. There are no words shown, but you can tell how this conversation is going by how you have to participate. Also showed them some precedents and inspirations. Other educational games. You may have heard of Dumb Ways to Die. If not the games, then at least the song. This was a campaign made by the Melbourne Metro to promote rail safety, and its core loop takes heavy inspiration from WarioWare. They share a lot of similar gameplay mechanics, but they don't share a lot of tone and message. But this is a way that we can take inspiration from other existing games. After introducing them to all of these games, I created this spectrum exercise. So this was a way to help build up their literacy in games. I took some of the games that we had discussed, and I took some of the subjects, topics, values that they had discussed, and created these spectrums of opposite ends. Then I took those games, placed them along the spectrums to give them some context so that they could decide where they wanted their game to be There are some of the spectrum topics like purpose, about how entertaining and how informative it is, are pretty easy for them to answer. But tone, whether casual or formal, might be more difficult, so giving them some examples. And things like challenge and pace are entirely out of their purview. So giving them a way to communicate to us how hard, how fast they want the game to be, this was a way to give them structure. Tell us what they want to prioritize. So I showed them this, sent them away, and they sent this back. So using this, we knew roughly where they wanted the game to be placed. However, we were in a situation where we had to do some chicken and egg concepting. Which comes first? We don't know what they know. They don't know what game they want. So the way we played this game of hot and cold is they outlined a problem that they wanted us to solve. We would create a concept based on how we understood that problem. They would use their newfound vocabulary to articulate what did and didn't work about our solution. And in so doing, they would be teaching us a little bit more about the subject of reproductive health, our own misconceptions and how we were representing it. So by speaking our language, we were starting to learn theirs. So here's what we made together. Wheel of Fertility. Fool around and find out. What is it? It's a mobile sandbox game that provides clinically accurate reproductive health knowledge to players in a way that is fun and digestible. It's primarily aimed at younger people who might be exposed to misleading information on the internet, and it is to provide them with an entry point into the topic of reproductive health, but with evidence-based information to help them make informed decisions. How does it work? So, in Wheel of Fertility, there is the eponymous Wheel of Fertility. It shows how likely you are to be pregnant or not pregnant. You adjust various factors such as your age, your height, your weight, your habits, do you exercise, do you smoke, do you drink, and you can see how these influence the likelihood of you becoming pregnant. There's options for contraception, and as you can see, the hormonal contraception actually disables the menstrual cycle because the effects start to become a bit blurred, but you can choose which cycle you're in. Then you take the wheel, you spin it using the percentage you just left it on, and you get a result. So, you're pregnant, and or not. This was how we were approaching that issue of serving both of our audiences. We provide the result, and then we ask the player, using their own morality, their own feelings, how do they feel about it? They can react with one of these options. They can say, yay. They could say, or they could say, oh no. So this was how we could cater to the pregnancy-seeking and pregnancy-avoidant audiences, and that third undecided audience. When you select one of the buttons, it would change the results that you would be shown. We assumed that if you responded positively to pregnancy, that means you want to learn more about how to become pregnant. You're in that audience bucket. But if you responded positively to not being pregnant, then we assume that you would like to stay not pregnant. You would like to learn more about contraceptives. And if you chose one of the neutral options, it meant that you were perhaps a little undecided, so it would give you information about both. So, this is where we have some more explicit lessons. After you choose your result, it leads you to a page detailing your results. It lists all of the options that you toggled on and tells you about how they affected the likelihood of you becoming pregnant. Each of the options has language that caters to supporting people who may want that result. That is why we asked for their opinion. And each result also has links so that people can continue their learning about the subjects that most interested them. This is only an introduction to the topics people could choose to chase up on their own. And then it loops back into the screen so players could change the parameters and see if they get a different result in different lessons. In addition to that, there were also implicit lessons. Simply from opening the game or playing the game, you would learn some of these things. From a single session of sex, the likelihood in optimal conditions is roughly around 30%. And it really only goes down from there. If a factor was listed, it implies that it would have an effect on your pregnancy. So even if you toggled nothing on, simply seeing it listed would show that, hey, this is something that will influence it. This is something you should consider. How much does it actually make that wheel visually move? You can tell how significant of an effect something is. For example, if you see exercise improves the wheel very slightly, and healthy eating improves it very slightly, but contraceptives move it massively, it gives you an idea for how much of this is influencing your result. You can see the way that hormonal contraceptives can influence your menstrual cycle. It's placed below that section so that if you had toggled it on, you would then be exposed to that information instead of the regular slider. And you cannot entirely remove the possibility of pregnancy. Life finds a way. So now I want to talk about the transference of ownership. This is about a feature that really showed how far we had come. We wanted people to play the game more. We wanted them to keep spinning, find out more information. Spinning the wheel multiple times was a good way to expose you to that probability. Doing it just once doesn't really sink in what those numbers mean. If you see 30% and think, oh, that's all right, and you spin it once and it doesn't land on it, then you may not think it's too significant. But if you think about the number of times you might have sex in a year, and you think about how many times you then spin the wheel and see if that 30% feels small anymore. You could explore some variables outside of your personal situation. Well, what if you do want to get pregnant in the future? You can start looking about different ages. You can start looking about different options to select. So we thought that the best way to get people to spin again was to unlock some new features. And the feature we used for player retention was sexually transmitted infections. Please, there we go. So, if you spun the wheel and hit the let's have sex button but did not have a condom on, you would gain this condition that would say you were at risk of an STI. It does not mean that you have an STI, it just means that you perhaps should consider getting tested for an STI. The game included these because of the effects that they can have on pregnancy. It was a way to inform people about them. You get prompted to take this STI test on your wheel, and you play this small minigame, also known as the STI loot box. You play this little swab minigame and reveal a result. You may not have an STI. Negative results were common. We wanted to reduce stigma about getting tested. But if you do get a result, you get to see how that particular STI can influence pregnancy. You gain this as a condition. It's almost a status effect, if you will, that would stay with you and persist over multiple spins of the wheel. But we didn't want to punish players, we didn't want to shame players, so people could choose to remove these STIs. It's not about making it a punishment for having sex, it's just about providing information. However, during our playtesting of this feature, there was some notoriety as there was one sentiment that came up repeatedly. Players were trying to catch all of the STIs. They would intentionally play through multiple times without protection, without removing any of the STIs. They took fooling around quite literally. Yay! Yippee! Self-motivated learning. This is an ideal educational outcome. You mean to say that players are intrinsically motivated to keep playing an educational game? This is great. They're going to see more of the reproductive health information. They're going to get that repeat exposure to probabilities, help internalize it. And they're going to have opportunity to find some rare dialogues. The results would change based on what factors you chose. So if you had an IUD inserted and became pregnant with less than 1% chance, most players are not going to see that, but these players might. Better yet was how our partner SWA responded to this. One of them, Oscar, had this idea. He mentioned that untreated STIs can lead to a condition known as pelvic inflammatory disease, PID. Because these players were, in effect, leaving a bunch of STIs untreated, that meant we could add this condition to those players. It was hidden content to reward player exploration. It was a new method of triggering content that was appropriate to the in-game systems, but also appropriate to the condition in real life. It would bring a degree of seriousness back. Players are goofing around collecting STIs, and then suddenly they learn about this new thing. It returns the focus back onto education. And all of this is as a response to an emergent player behavior. These people didn't play games before this project. I feel like this represented a synthesis of our skills transference about teaching them and them teaching us. In order to make this game, we had needed quite close collaboration. At times we had daily syncs. We were very candid with our discussions and very inquisitive. We would ask and answer questions and answer them without judgment. We listened to each other, we deferred to each other's expertise. In our efforts to provide education to players, we ended up teaching each other as well. I guess you could say, maybe the real teaching was the learnings we made along the way. All right, let's wrap this up, pun intended. So, teaching players how to learn. First step, create that nice and easy on-ramp. Encourage and reward them for their curiosity. Provide them avenues for further growth. React to what your players are actually doing, not just what you think they're going to do. And be willing to learn yourself. To work on this project, I needed to learn a lot about reproductive health. You may have noticed half of this presentation is about those facts. I've been teaching them to you. And that's because the best way to teach people is to care. Care about the people you're teaching, care about what you're teaching them, care about who you're doing it with. And if that sounds cheesy, that's the end of the presentation. Thank you very much for your time. My name's Micheal Baron. If you want to find me, you can use one of these links. And if you enjoyed this talk and this subject, then you can see more of it. Hello? Tomorrow. Ragnar, Oscar, and Paris are going to give another talk. Ragnar and Oscar are from SWA. Paris here is from Cerebral Fix. So if you like the subject, please check out that talk tomorrow as well. Or if you want to play the game, there have been QR codes scattered throughout. Thank you for your time. How are we doing on time? Oh, that was way faster than I thought. Well, I hadn't planned on taking questions, but if anyone has one, I guess we have time. Whoa, that's a lot of hands.
Hello, really good talk. You mentioned with playtesting, who did you get as playtesters for this project?
So we actually had some non-standard practice in that because it was a sensitive subject, we didn't want to do the testing ourselves, and so the client actually wanted to lead the playtesting. So we actually had a session where we had to train them on playtesting and how to record that information, and they tested it first on their staff and then on some of their clients who it would be irresponsible to let us have direct contact with at that point.
Awesome, thank you.
Hey, I have a question. So a lot of games, when they have like chance as a thing, like probability, people are really bad at like what they think a probability is versus what it usually is. In a lot of games, they kind of fudge that a little so it feels more natural. Was that like a factor at all in this? And because you have a lot of probability based on like, you know, a very real subject, did that like impact the design at all? Sorry, I hope that makes sense. This is a bit of an
No, it
open question.
absolutely does. That was a major debate that happened, was about do we fudge the numbers, because early on people would just put in their personal information, spin it once and be like, done. And it's like, okay, well, do we need to inflate these numbers, which makes it start not being representative, but it does mean that people get exposed to information that they may not otherwise have seen. I think in the end we ended up with a moderate result where some of the really rare dialogues are actually slightly more than 1% because it turned out that was really hard to ever land on. But we did, well, they wrote it and they want people to read it. The primary purpose is mostly to inform. So some of the likelihoods are slightly increased, but ideally still low enough to actually represent what it was like.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Because educational games are kind of tough to get in front of the audiences that do need it, if we were to explore themes like this in our own projects, what are some important design elements that you found working with the group you're working with that might be important in other projects, e.g. like the feedback from the player or something like that? What would be good to adapt into other projects from this project?
So, after having worked with the sexual health educators, I can say they are the better people to ask, and they are totally happy to answer these questions. They've been a fantastic client to work with. They were super open about anything we asked, and they were super inquisitive about what we had to say. If you want to approach a topic like this, contact Sexual Wellbeing Aotearoa. They have a team now of people who have been educated in game design, so they may have some way of being able to communicate with you. You're welcome.
Thanks so much.
When it came to designing the game, was there ever like any debate around a model where you have the game with the learning embedded in it versus like an intermittent learning kind of style where you have like a game and then you like switch to like education and then back to game or anything like that?
So that was kind of why I brought up those tutorial zones where it feels like just playing the game is learning. There is a little bit of what you were saying in that after you get that result, there is just a lot of dense information for people to read, but that was reduced a lot, and a lot of that offloaded back onto their website, which already had much more catered and detailed information. So there is a little bit of that, but our ideal was if you just play it, you'll learn some stuff. It's not like time for fun is over, go back to learning.
Cool, thanks.
Cool beans. If there's any last questions, otherwise we may wrap up there. Awesome.